Everyone, welcome back to another video. This is the second round of the Australian Chess Championships. In this round, I'm facing the veteran international master, Stephen Solomon. I have played him twice before, one time with the white pieces, and another time with the black pieces rather. And both of those games actually are being grinded down in a rook and opposite bishop color endgame. And well, that's actually because Stephen Solomon is what many would consider an endgame specialist. He, in Australia at least, is very well known for his endgame abilities. So yeah, but that's a fun fact about him. Let's get into the game. So we have the following moves going into a Caro-Kann. I played him once before, actually, in 2018, the Australian Championships. Then that year, and he played c4 this game, which is known as a pseudo panov. In this game, we ended up having some sort of a bunch of central exchanges like that, and we got eventually some sort of like isolated queen's pawn position like this, where I was quite solid, but eventually we got this sort of endgame I was talking about earlier, and he beat me. But this game, he goes for the classical main line, and we get in this position bishop f5, which has been probably the move which I played for most of my life and definitely my childhood. I decided to go for knight f6, and it's not that I've never played this before, but definitely as of recently I've become a little bit more interested in this one. So I mean, if you are somewhat up to date with Fury, you probably have seen this a bunch, and following the moves like this, say c3, you probably have seen this idea where black goes rook e8 check and now h5. A few years ago this was like crazy stuff. It was like, whoa, you can't move your h pawn like this. But you know, the old main lines were like, okay, you'd go g6, but then very often you'd get hit with like h4, and this was sort of a hook for white to attack on the king side. And also you didn't really want to go h6 because this always ends up a bit passive, and very often the sort of structural advantage white had with you know, black's doubled f pawns are often told in the long run. But around, say, 2017, I think, this was actually around the time when I was first picking up the Caro-Kann. I actually learned about this h5 move way back then, but I had no idea it was going to turn into the beast that it is these days, where, you know, pretty much everyone plays h5 in this position. It's not even a debate like which move you're going to go for. Everyone just goes for h5. And of course the idea is, well, I mean, it's maybe not that obvious, but you know, you are protecting the pawn which is being attacked, and people sort of discovered that you could actually just sort of push the pawn like actually up the board and sort of create some problems for white if they like castle kingside, for example. But even still, I have to admit that for a long time I was a little bit skeptical of not like h5 in particular, but just this whole concept of taking on the doubled f pawn, let's say. And it's only more recently, like actually analyzing this myself, that I've really come to actually believe that this is actually like just as good, maybe if not even better, at least in the current climate of opening Fury, than the bishop f5 lines. And also I should note, if you're like maybe a bit lower rated and you just want to like pick up the line and see how it goes, a lot of people won't even go for c3 actually, and this whole like very precise setup. A lot of people are just going to like develop a knight to f3. But it's actually quite important that you want to develop the knight to e2, and then like maybe like f4 eventually in the future. It's not completely clear like where the knight's going to go from e2 just yet. Very often it might go to g3. But at the lower levels, it's a very common mistake for people to go knight f3, just simply because if you look at the knight's activity right now, it's very limited. In its scope, it can't really go to either of these squares, e5 or g5, because our pawn f6 is being a bit of a pain in the ass for white to deal with. But okay, getting back to the position after h5, this is what happened in the game. I think later on in the tournament I saw someone actually go bishop e3, which is a sort of interesting idea, but okay, I won't go too into that right now. We have c3, the following moves, and now h5. So there are basically two different setups that white can go for here. One is the one where they castle short, and there's another that Solo went for in the game. By the way, Solo is just what we call Solomon for short here in Australia, where he went for bishop e3, 97 long castles. And to be honest, I've always found this approach a little bit mysterious, because typically in the Caro-Kann, definitely in the classical variation with bishop f5, it's very common for black to sort of storm like their queenside pawns up the board. So I've always been a little bit skeptical of sort of castling straight into that. I've always thought that castling short was a little bit more healthy from a maybe strategic point of view, you could say. And I've definitely talked to at least one friend in particular who he honestly just said, and he's around my strength, he's just like, I honestly don't understand why white would even castle long. But that being said, it's just almost as popular as the short castles line, so it definitely has to be taken seriously. And coming into the game, I was actually pretty sure that Solomon would go for this because he has had a few games against this Tartakower variation, and pretty much in all of them he has gone for the long castles approach. So of course the game I looked at some variations and ideas, and well, Knight F8's pretty normal, but after like C4 or like King B1, there's a bunch of different moves for white actually, but a lot of the times they can actually sort of transpose. It's more important to really understand the ideas when you play these positions. We had C4 though in the game, and here the most common move is bishop E6. And it's very typical that at some point we're going to put a rook on C8, play B5, and try to like obtain counterplay on the queen side. Very often if like knight C3 ever comes, we're going to play something like bishop B4, and basically the point is that we want to try and like exchange off the knight and make it easier for us to sort of break apart the queen side. And while bishop E6 is definitely playable in this position, I had another idea in mind that I learned recently from a source of mine, you could say, where black can actually play h4 in this position. And I have to say, the very first time I saw this idea, I was very skeptical of it because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to push the h4 up the board when white castles queenside. When white short castles right like in this position, it's very common to go like h4 immediately, and like if possible even get a pawn to h3, because you know white's king is castled there, we're trying to weaken stuff a little bit. But you know, when white castles long, it doesn't really make as much sense, because like, well, okay, so I played king b1 in the game, and what I played was not h3, but you know, a lot of people might look at h4 and think I'm trying to push that pawn one more square, when that is not in fact the idea. There's actually one Jobava game in the database where this was played, and basically I just don't believe in this. We opened the G file and knight's going to come to G3 maybe, and it really looks absolutely suicidal. I don't recommend playing this way. It doesn't really make much sense either. But actually the idea of well, you know, this whole h4 thing and after king b1 is to actually play bishop g4. And you might sort of be like, how does that work? Could we not go bishop g4 anyway? What does h4 do? But the whole point is that after king b1, bishop g4, now because our pawn is on h4, if they kick our bishop away like they say did in the game, we can actually put our bishop on h5. And one idea immediately that might sort of occur to you is that we want to bring the bishop to g6 and exchange it off a white's sort of annoying bishop, you could say, on this diagonal. But another sort of, you know, idea of the bishop being on this h5 square is that it's actually a very annoying piece from white's perspective. They would like to maybe centralize this knight to a slightly more active square, which is d3, to help maybe support a d5 break in the center. But when our bishop is actually seen on this h5 square, it becomes a lot more difficult to really move the knight. They probably have to spend the tempo of the rook, moving that somewhere first. So I actually played rook c1 in the game, which, you know, sort of makes sense getting out of the pin, but in some sense it is a bit of a small victory for black if white sort of takes their rook off the d file, because that means that, you know, if white ever wants to push like, say, d5 in the future, for example, it's going to make it a lot more difficult for them to really exert influence down the file because, well, they don't have a rook there. And if they say go like rook d2 instead, I've seen some ideas like these, but very often we're going to go bishop b4, and now they might go knight c3, but their knight stepped out of one pin on e2 with the rook on d1 to one where it is now being pinned by this bishop on this diagonal. But okay, again in the game we had rook c1 in this position, and I'd seen some other games of Solomon in the Tataka Caro-Kann, where he actually played a similar, you know, like rook d to c1 maneuver. So actually, even though I hadn't really like analyzed particularly this position beforehand, you know, it was kind of an expected move, you could say, in some sense that he was going to go for this. And I ended up playing knight g6. Afterwards, when we were analyzing a bit solo, he said like he didn't understand why I just played bishop g6. And honestly, at the time of the analysis, I couldn't really give a good explanation either for why I did not play bishop g6 actually. And I'd spent a bit of time in this position, sort of fumbling around, not really sure what to do. This was actually like the first real serious game I've ever really tested this whole setup in. So I wasn't really too familiar with all the nuances and how like everything sort of works together in this position. But now I understand a lot better why in the sort of analysis I'd seen of this position that you often sort of refrain from going bishop g6 immediately, and you focus more on putting the knight on g6, when admittedly it's not even clear what the knight actually does on the square, but actually very often the knight's sort of purpose is well, sometimes you might like exchange on e2 and try to bring a piece to f4, but also what you're very often aiming for is to actually bring the knight back to the e7 square, and only then go to back to bishop g6 at some point like that. And the sort of reasoning is that the knight is actually on f8. Well, it's probably our worst placed piece in the position right now. It's not really doing a whole lot, so it kind of makes sense to first like improve this knight to a more active square. And you might still think on e7 it's not really doing much, but that's not completely true, because on e7 what it is doing is it's controlling the d5 square. It's also controlling the f5 one, which might be important in some positions later on. But especially d5 I think is kind of important because, well, the d5 break is one of White's sort of main ideas in this position. If they can get in d5 under good circumstances, well, White is usually going to have a sort of comfortable game. And also it's worth noting that if in the future we ever play b5, which is sort of one of Black's main pawn breaks in these Caro-Kann variations, and White ever plays c5, well, from e7 the knight can always hop into d5, which is a quite nice outpost for it. So okay, in the game we had rook c1, knight g6, a3, and this was a bit of a mysterious move, but it's actually not so easy to really suggest moves for White. If I were to maybe try and give one reason behind a3 being played, it might be that if you play knight c3, bishop b4 again is sort of an idea I've mentioned a couple times now. This could potentially be annoying, which maybe is why a3 was played. Not too sure though. It's not really, even though it is maybe slightly weakening, you could say. It's nothing to be too fussed about in my opinion. So in this position I played a6, and there are a couple different things you could do. If you switch the engine on, it will tell you there are like 10 different moves that will pretty much have the same evaluation. Maybe not quite, but I think there are only like 5 or so. And actually with that in mind, I would say that my time usage on this move was pretty awful. I spent about 20 minutes, and that's just not necessary. This is not a critical position like at all. There's still like not that much tension going on between the pieces. There's not like a whole lot to calculate. I really just need to sort of trust my gut intuition, which from the start was to play either something like rook b8, a6, and I was trying to like in my head sort of compare like which of these do I think is a little bit better. But you know, I should just sort of shut up and play one of the moves, right? It's not something you spend 20 minutes on. I think I was also considering whether to bring the knight back to e7 immediately. But okay, like a6 is a playable move, and you know, you sort of play it, move on, and instead of spending like 20 minutes, you spend like 5. I think that's more reasonable, but okay. Can't change what happened. Rook hg1 was played in the game. There was another move, rook hg1, which I've done some analysis on. I think this is maybe a bit more of a critical approach. And rook hg1, first of all, I'm going to go for this move. And when this was played in the game, I was sort of thinking like, maybe my opponent's idea is to go g4. I guess, okay, the rook is superficially like a bit more active here than it is on the h file, of course, but to me it seemed like if I just did any random move, like g4 was quite unlikely possibility, when after say like take, when back in this position White's rook was still on h1, they couldn't really go for this because, well, the bishop would just simply be hanging on the e3. But of course now it's a little bit of a different story with the trying to find the position I'm talking about, you know, the rook on the e1 square. And again, with my last move in mind, a6, a very logical idea is to go b5 and try and break on the queen side. But to be honest, one thing I will say is that after, and I'm not completely sure about this yet, but at least my gut feeling is that I shouldn't really be in such a rush to go for this a6 b5 thing. I think that probably I can just, you know, sit back, go knight e7, queen d7, rook a8 first, not really show too many of my cards, and also ask like White, like, what are they doing? And it's not really trivial for White to come up with something. But okay, again, like a6 b5, is there anything too wrong with this? No. But I was looking at some interesting ideas here where, you know, like I was thinking if White ever goes c5, for example, like I should be fairly happy to see this. Like to bring a knight to c3, I'm going to bring mine back to e7 probably. A knight coming to d5 is quite likely. If they go bishop g6, I could potentially just go bishop g6, make an exchange, put a knight into d5, and I thought I'm having quite a decent position. Yes, I have to watch out for my g6 pawn hanging, but okay, that's fairly easy to defend. Maybe push g5, and maybe in this position I even have other options, such as playing f5. And of course they can't really take that because I'm simply going to win their queen. But okay, back to what I was primarily thinking about during the game, which was white just keeping the tension here, because I mean they're not concerned about b takes e4 really. G4 was what I thought was a fairly principled response, and if takes, like my gut sort of feeling was like I don't really want to go for this. If running G4, like trapping my bishop, and if I spend another tempo of this, like okay, like they can't really win a pawn because again I'm winning their queen, but like something about this I just didn't really quite trust. But it turns out with actually proper analysis, this is in fact okay. And like for example, if they try kick the bishop away, I can just go bishop b4 and it's not a big deal. If I can like trade off the bishops like this, I should be doing fine. And also like if they just say keep the tension a little bit, I can increase my activity, attack the g3 pawn. Whether I actually want to take that or not is not completely clear since I always open up the g file, but it's at least a possibility and I don't seem to be any clear danger in this position. But I have to say the one I was mainly considering in the game was actually not bishop takes g3 and actually bishop f3, sort of giving up at the pawn. And well, in this position, of course, they're not going to take that and lose their queen. They're going to come back here probably. There is also an in-between move they can throw in, but just for the sake of simplicity, let's put this on the board. And I was looking at this sort of position where I was like, okay, I wasn't even sure if like, I probably looked at this, I wasn't maybe completely sure what I was going to do here, but pretty likely if I actually got to this, I'd take. And generally speaking, my impression of this, and okay, let's maybe put another move on the board to show how white's sort of up a pawn. My sort of instinct from afar was like, I should probably be doing okay, I think at least, with like the opposite card bishops, even though like I'm down a pawn because of the opposite card bishops, because I probably have like this counterplay on the queen side, let's say. And the one thing you need to understand about opposite card bishop positions, of course, is, as has been said many times, is that the side who's attacking usually has the advantage. And because of that, I did rather get the feeling that the extra pawn probably wouldn't matter that much. I have a decent amount of compensation, especially with some of like these soft light squares around the white king. But at the end of the day, I wasn't quite brave enough, maybe you could say, to go for this. And whether he would even go for g4 in this position, I'm not completely sure. Rook e1, well, the one thing I will say about it is it's one of these moves where you make it and it's kind of ambiguous whether or not like this is actually your idea, right? It could just be to generally activate your rook, but you're also sort of forcing your opponent to think about the ramifications of like, what if I go for this sort of sneaky thing over here potentially. But okay, I did want to briefly also mention rook hg1. I thought this might have been a bit better than what was went for in the game, because let's say 97, after rook h1, the move I ended up playing by the way is 97, and you know, if g4 here, this actually isn't too dangerous, because I actually can just take here, and this position is quite comfortable for black after we actually exchange off the light square bishops like this, and especially with no open g file, it's really not too dangerous. Black is doing fairly fine from what I understand. But one thing after rook hg1, to say if we try to go for the same approach after 97, is that now if we go g4, it's a lot more difficult for black to actually properly defend this position after some exchanges like these, because now clearly we are not having a pawn recapture on g3 closing up the g file, we have a rook recapturing, and even though white's structure, you know, doesn't look amazing, that doesn't really matter because they have the g file to work with. And I've analyzed these positions a bit more, like queen d7, rook cg1, g6. You don't really want to put the bishop on g6 in this situation, because like say after h4, you just are probably going to run into h5 at some point when the bishop's going to be forcibly removed from this square, and then black is sort of just going to crash in on g7. It's not a pretty sight, so I think g6 is probably a bit better, but still after like f4, black has to be very careful in these sorts of positions. And also another sort of nice idea I should note is that in some of these positions it is sometimes possible to sort of play bishop h2, kicking the rook out of g1, but in this exact position, like, and okay, one idea is like you could just sort of repeat moves and sort of go for a draw, if white is sort of happy with that, of course. But the sort of problem is that in this position doesn't even really work, because white can actually just ignore the fact you're attacking the rook and just go g4 anyway. If you try to take the rook, well, you're going to lose one of your two pieces that are hanging right now. It's not going to be so great, so you're probably going to take, but surprisingly this position after knight takes g3, and now you can take the rook, but this position occurs. White is technically down the exchange, but holy shit, are you going to have the fight of your life to hold on to this after stuff like knight f5, bishop h6 coming. Yeah, I personally don't really trust in this, so it has to be said that, you know, sometimes, you know, white just might sacrifice the exchange and open up the g file, and just be killing you. Always watch out for this. So yeah, okay, what happened in the game though was rook hg1, and now 97, again a very typical idea as we've been talking about throughout this video. And actually, in fact, I think it might have been this one that I spent 20 minutes on, not the a6 move that I spent on the a6 move, rather I played on the previous move. I think this one I might have spent about 10 minutes on. I think 97 I spent, this one was I think the one I spent about 20 minutes on, because I was like calculating all these variations. Yeah, this one seems like the one I think so. But okay, yeah, 97 was played. Now queen d2. And this is a bit of an innocuous move. It's not completely clear what my opponent's idea is at first, but it just sort of like after the game at least seemed to me that he was just trying to like shuffle his pieces around a bit in the hopes that he's like improving his position somehow. And probably what I should have done here is something similar. I probably should just play like queen d7 and bring rook to maybe d8, and then maybe go for b5 at some point when it is appropriate. But instead I played bishop g6. In hindsight, I think this was a little bit rushed, and the reason is on the next move he played rook cd1, and the thing is that when the bishop is still on h5, is that rook coming to d1 again is a lot less likely, because you know you're always in this dilemma where your rook is sort of nice there, but you can't really move the knight because, well, of course, then the rook is going to hang. So for that reason, I think it would have been a lot more unpleasant if I played queen d7, when it really sort of asks White the question of like, how are they going to like slowly improve their position now? Maybe to go for knight c3, but I think at this point b5 does make a lot of sense, when of course, you know, White doesn't really want to take. I don't think this makes much sense. They probably don't also want to play c5, I think, after just bishop c7, bishop g6, knight d5, maybe a5, b4 as well. Black is doing more than fine, but a very sensible maybe approach you could at least consider in this position, even though the computer doesn't love it, is d5. Very often this is the sort of thing Black needs to be watching out for when they play b5. Does this d5 response from White make sense? And the reason is that because once we move the b pawn, is that after takes, c5 is always going to create a sort of annoying passed pawn for White, followed by probably at some point like putting a piece on d4. Although to be honest, I don't know how amazing this is, because with the knight on like c3 instead of e2, if knight and e2 it can easily come to d4, but from c3 it's sort of a bit far away from doing that. So maybe in this position White's idea would be more along the lines of, say, going maybe even c takes b5. I was thinking like just taking here, for example, and trying to play this position. But Black can also say just go b takes c4, and the bishop on d3 would gain the tempo. So let's say takes, rook a b8, bringing a rook to the b file, king a1, sort of getting off the b file. Would make sense. Rook e d8, a bit of a subtle move, but we're just sort of protecting the queen, and we'll see how maybe that makes sense in, say, this variation where White is attacking now bishop. Now he can just move it to e5 quite safely and increase the pressure on White's position, because our queen is in fact being protected. So yeah, just some food for thought. I think queen d7, like very natural move, just improving the pieces a bit, would have been a bit better than what I did in the game with bishop g6, because now White could a lot more easily bring their rook to d1. I go b5, and again I think it probably would have been a bit better to like keep my to not show my hand rather, and just play a slow improving move like queen d7. Maybe even knight f5 would be an interesting idea. But I think with b5, even though the computer still sort of says like this is okay, I do think this sort of invited this nice idea from White where they could go bishop takes g6, f takes g6. I didn't really want to go knight takes g6 here, because I thought that if c5, like if I move my bishop now, knight c3 followed by d5, White has a quite substantial positional advantage. They could also go d5 immediately, actually. We're basically, you know, from a fundamental point of view, again, like when we think about this whole Tartakower structure, if White ever achieves like d5 under good circumstances like these, then strategically they are doing quite well, and they've basically got that in this position. So what I instead did was I decided to play f takes g6 with the idea that, you know, if this goes c5, well, I have quite nice control over d5, which is why in the game White went d5 now, with again this sort of thematic idea of going c takes d5, c5, and I knew in the game that I should probably be doing like okay here, but I also sort of felt that this was what Solo wanted to play, and that he would be very comfortable with getting like a knight to d4 or something like that, and I wasn't really sure what I was sort of going to do in this sort of position, but I think definitely principled in hindsight, was probably just grabbing the pawn and after c5 going bishop e5. When, to be honest, I probably slightly underestimated just how robust black's position is. For example, if they want to play like a knight into d4, they might not want to do it immediately because then we could probably just snap it off. So let's say they go f4, bishop e7, knight d4. Now I can probably go like queen d7, knight f5, for example. And there's some like computing line I have where white like wins back the pawn and we get this endgame where maybe we are probably going to pick up the c6 pawn and doing okay, but I probably shouldn't have been so quick to maybe dismiss this whole variation of the game, where I instead actually went c5, with my idea basically being that I sort of have this queenside pawn mass, which I thought could potentially pose white some problems on the queen side, where maybe I'm going to play b takes c4, open up the b file, get a knight into like one of these squares somehow. I thought actually that I was doing quite decently at this point, but I definitely think I got a little bit too comfortable and probably overconfident in my position, where at this point after knight f4 from my opponent, I played this move bishop takes f4, which was actually quite a big mistake. It went unpunished in the game, but I definitely overreacted to this whole idea of white putting a knight into the e6 square. It was actually just possible, and someone pointed this out to me after the game. I could just go queen b6, and it's really not that scary. I'm going to play like b takes e4 next, rook b8, and I have a lot of counterplay down the b file. Bishop takes f4. My whole point kind of behind this was I was going to get a knight into d4, and I was going to like take, and I was going to have all this sexy looking counterplay. But the reality is that after d6, and white's sort of running to like infiltrate with the queen, and I go knight d4 to stop that, is that the knight in d4 is actually very unstable, and the sort of way to exploit it is maybe not superhuman, but it pops up in a lot of these variations, which is why the computer evaluates this whole bishop takes f4 move as bad, even though I played it like almost instantly. Is that basically in all these positions when the knight gets to d4, and this being the worst version of it, white can just play b4, absolutely exploiting the center. Maybe not the center, but like the c5 like anchor for the knight here up, and black is unbelievably just lost. There's like not much they can do. For example, if you play the very natural looking b takes c4 and maybe put a rook on the b file, even though this sort of might look winning, it's not the case, because white can actually just go king a2 and there's absolutely nothing for black. Their knight's hanging in the center, and yeah, pretty much dead and lost. Fortunately for me, however, Solomon was not, he didn't see that resource. I definitely didn't either. b4 was just not on my radar, not maybe the most natural move in the world, you could say as well. He still played queen d3, I played queen d7, and it was still possible to go for this whole d6, knight d4, b4 thing, but I mean, if you don't see it like back here, right, it's pretty unlikely you're gonna see it like in this position. So he played g4 instead. I took it. I was also considering like knight d4 maybe and like sacrificing the pawn, but I have a feeling if I switch the engine on, it's going to say b4 again. So yeah, g4, h6, g3, take happened, and I went g5 now. And actually by this point I was like doing fairly okay, but the problem was that after g4, I got a bit like too overconfident again, and I wasn't really seeing the position for what it was. In particular, I was just overlooking some of my opponent's like tactical concrete resources, you could say, in the position, where I thought I could just, you know, like I know it's okay, I can take and like swap some pieces, and I kind of just didn't want to go for this. It's hard to, it wasn't even like there was a concrete reason, it was just like, oh, I really wanted to win this game. I really wanted to put some pressure on my opponent, and I felt knight d4 was just the most ambitious move in the position, so I went for that. If I was in the mindset of like I need to hold this, maybe I'd play g takes f4, and to be honest, I don't really think I would lose this position. But, and by the way, I'm like up a pawn, but it's a really weird structure because I have like these two pairs of double pawns. But I just got like overconfident after knight d4, and after bishop g3, I sort of underestimated. And by the way, they can't go bishop e3, it's worth noting, because then knight f3, rook moves, knight e5, and I'm hitting their queen and their pawn, so they are kind of screwed here. The issue was that after bishop g3 instead, if they take the slow route to kick the knight out, it's very difficult to actually take action against that. Well, I can still like play rook takes e1, rook e8, and I'm within the realms of equality here. I should be doing okay, but instead I was a bit of a moron and apparently still a little bit rusty because I played rook e d8, and Basically, the whole issue is that my idea was in this position was that I was going to take on d5 and, like, win a pawn. And I spent this move calculating, actually, like, for a few minutes, like, what happens if Solo, like, takes on d5 and goes b4 and tries to win the pawn back like this. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm not, like, that much better, but it shouldn't be too bad for me. But then, like, after I conclude that and I play queen takes d5, I realized how much of a moron I really was, and the idea for him was to never take on d5 and go b4. It was just to play rook e8 check and absolutely kill me. And I was like, what an idiot am I for just not seeing this? And for that reason, in this position, rook e d8 was probably like the losing mistake, you could say, in some sense, because once we got to this position, yes, queen takes d5 blunders the queen, but the real mistake was just not seeing that from here. And then going for this move, which loses control of the file, and, like, I mean, if I don't take on c4 and do whatever, they're just going to win the pawn there. And if I don't take on d5 here, again, they're going to take and just, like, massacre all my stuff there. So, like, okay, this is what happened. Queen takes d5, and I didn't resign because I was just, like, playing off of inertia, I guess you could say. And, I tried to do some tricks here. But unfortunately, I mean, I knew this didn't work because I just saw he could move the queen in. And if I take the bishop with the rook, then I hang e8, and if I take with the knight, well, he just moves the queen to either c7 or e7, and then quite simply he went to e7 the game, he wins 1 to 2 pieces back, and, like, I'm completely lost, so I just resign. So, like, yeah, I mean, this game puts me at 0-3 with Solomon, which is a bit of a sad score, I guess you could say, but is what it is. I felt like I learned some things from this game, and definitely I got a well needed lesson or experience, maybe you could say, in sort of playing these Tartakower positions, maybe being a little bit more patient in certain positions, also understanding more on a deeper level, you could say, the importance of why you want to keep the bishop on h5 and why you go for this knight g6, knight e7 thing, and keeping the sort of waiting game going for a while, like in this position, for example, like, okay, I could have gone like queen d7, I didn't have to go immediately for bishop g6. But to round things out again, I just want to pull up the appearance, just to get a broader view again of how the tournament is unfolding. So you can see on board 3 here, I was playing against Solo, and I lost. On board 2, it was actually a draw with the veteran FM, Bill Jordan, and maybe somewhat veteran, you could say, international master Trevor Tao. And I guess the other sort of big surprise of the round, maybe you could say, was Gary Lane, actually, the third seed of the tournament, losing, sorry, not losing, but drawing to Haran Salasan, which, left Gary on a not so great starting score of 0.5 out of 2. And also, I should note that this was the first game of the first double round day of the tournament, so after losing this miserable, wretched game, I had to basically get my, mental sheet in check and make sure that in like an hour or so, I'd be mentally capable of playing another chess game. And I was paired in round 3 against candidate master Hui Li from Macau. He is apparently their #1 player. But yeah, hope you guys found this recap informative. You enjoyed it. If you did, the usual, I won't even bother saying that. But yeah, hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you until next time.